Friends of the CFF site, welcome into the Week 4 show. I'm your host, Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site, and we have a lot to get to. I mentioned on last week's show that when Week 3 is in the books, we were going to be about a quarter of the way through the season, and we're at that point right now. You know, very a tipping point for some players on rosters right now, and I think, and I mentioned this in my news, in my notes and observations that I posted in the Week 3 notes and observations over the weekend, that this was going to be sort of a jumping off point for some players, for owners on certain players, depending on how you stand in your league. If you're off to a nice start right now, you could have patience with some players that have had a slow start, or you may have to jump ship early and go after some of those waiver wire guys. You're scratching and clawing to stay in contention here midway through the season. And that always happens this time. You know, last year was a year of COVID. We didn't know what was going to go on with last minute scratches. It seems like there's injuries always take a toll on the season every year. So far, that's happened. I think this week and next week are going to be really big when it comes to transfers. Remember the 4-game transfer rule. All players, I believe, could play up to 4 games before deciding to maybe taking a red shirt and transfer. We've had some transfers come through this week. I expect many more to hit the portal next week. And so this will be a busy news weekend coming up, not only for games, but for player news and whether or not some players will be moving on from the teams in which they're enrolled at right now. So we'll see how that plays out over the weekend. I'm going to start off with the 4-in-1 Super Fantasy League because we have an update on that. So let's, and then I'm going to get into the games after that. And then anything that comes up through, between now and the end of the show is free game. Look, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling juiced. It's ready. I'm ready to go. Had my 5-mile run today. The first day I was able to get a jog here just north of New Orleans in weather that was less than 80 degrees. And so felt good, got the run in, and I'm all energized here recording this on a Wednesday evening. I'm going to try to get you get this up on the website for you guys that like to listen late night, maybe for your commute tomorrow, give you a couple of days to catch up on some of the content we're going to cover here on the show. But with that being said, before we get into the weekend's games, let's go ahead and give you an update on the 4-in-1 Super Fantasy League. And first of all, before we get into the 2-halves tournament, the one thing to remember is that you still, the head-to-head tournament starts this coming week in Week 4. So I don't have the bracket laid out yet, but if you are in the top 80 teams in the overall standings through the first 3 weeks, you're going to be seeded by where you're at in the standings right now into the head-to-head tournament. I'm going to have that updated hopefully by later tonight. Get that link up on the homepage of the website. So you will have a link not only to the 2-halves tournament, but now you will also have a link to the head-to-head tournament that starts this week, Week 4, and that'll be posted up on the site. The only amendment I made so far with the league is going to be in the Eliminator League. The one thing that I'm going to mention, and there's some guys that have had some trouble with this already, is they've had problems getting locked out of their lineups. Guys, you've got to clear your lineups every week. If you get caught with a player that you started the week before and one of their games start for the current week, you're not going to be able to update your lineup unless you reach out to me, and then I have to be available. I've got to be able to make changes through a commissioner's tool to be able to get to that in a timely fashion. And then for the player that you did not take out on time, because technically that would be starting him for 2 play periods, you will be stuck with a 0 for that position. But remember, because we're playing best ball, you've got some flexibility. You've got a little bit of margin of error. So the amendment that I made to the Eliminator League, instead of starting out with X amount of teams in the first week of the Eliminator, which starts in Week 5, I'm going to start it out in Week 5 with every active team that has participated in one of the first 4 weeks of the season. So if you weren't used to the league and you didn't update your roster and you got locked out and maybe, you didn't reach out to me and you took a 0 and, you're falling behind in not only the 2-halves tournament, but in the overall standings, as long as you have been active through the first 4 weeks. In other words, you've set at least one lineup. You are eligible to start off in the Eliminator, which will begin in week 5. Now, here's the update on that. How many teams are actually active right now? There are 123 out of 128 teams that have made at least one roster through the first 3 weeks of the season. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 7 teams, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams that have not made a lineup yet. For you guys that have fallen behind, it looks like some guys only made rosters for 1 week and then maybe kind of let it put it on the back burner. As long as you have participated in one of the first 4 weeks, so it's not too late to start up and qualify for that Eliminator, you are qualified for the Eliminator as long as you're not sitting on 0 points going into week 5. That's the only change that's made. I've done that to expand the field a little bit in the Eliminator and give the guys that have kind of fallen behind in the beginning that weren't used to playing in the league a chance to kind of reboot and get into the Eliminator and have something to play for while the Total Points League is going on. The 2-halves leagues will be going on as well. And then we've got the head-to-head tournament. So starting in week 5, all 4 leagues will then be participating at one time. Remember, the same lineup applies to every league. I will get the head-to-head tournament bracket updated. Hopefully I'll have that by later tonight and tomorrow. The 4-in-1 Super Fantasy League 2-halves tournament is now, I believe, in the final 8. Let me go ahead and give you the results of that. And like I said, these links are going to be up on the website. In the top half of the bracket, we've got Barker 04 going up against EA Francis 10. We've got Haynes 76 going up against Husker 49ers. J Stubby 13 going up against PTM 19. And then in the final match, I believe this is the quarterfinal round, Swamp Fever playing the Jackson 4. Now let's look at the league overall point total in general. Who's the overall leader after the first 3 weeks of the season? PTM 19, followed by the Jackson 4. Dwight Peebles at number 3. Blackbeard's Delight jumped all the way up to number 4. Last year's defending champion in both the tournament and the overall points league. Blackbeard's Delight added again up to number 4. And then XTN Nook, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but they're up to number 5, and looks like Andrew P. Katz at number 6. Now, that's going to be your overall leaders throughout as far as the total points leagues go. And so right now, those are your leaders in that league. We've got the quarterfinals for the 2-halves tournament. And then, of course, we've got the head-to-head tournament that starts off this week. I'll have that posted up on the website. A lot going on in that 4-in-1 Super Fantasy League. I feel like I need an admin to kind of help me track everything. If any of you guys out there in that are participating in the leagues feel like you want to help out a little bit, help me out with the site, I'll take some volunteers for that. It's always nice to get these things updated at the beginning of the week and not have some of you guys kind of sitting on the results. But I think with the bracket being posted online and you guys being able to check out the results on the Fantrax website, you know how you stand going into the following week. I'd just like to get it updated a little bit, but with all of the early week content that we're trying to push out over at the site, between the notes and observations, the waiver wire, and trying to get the projections up for you guys in time before Thursday or by Thursday. It's just a lot going on in the front end of the week. And then, of course, Mike hard at work with the DFS content as well. We've got the Thursday night showdown write-up already available for you on the site. I know Mike's going to be working on the rest of the week. The only thing that seems in question is we may not have a Saturday late night slate write-up for you this weekend. And so that's the only thing right now that's in question for the end of the week is the DFS Saturday late night write-up. But I think we've got everything else coming to you and you guys, and it should be posted in due time. We've got the Thursday showdown already up, and then we'll have the rest of the week coming in the next couple of days for you guys. So that's an update on the 4-1. That's what's going on with the website. The week 4 projections are done. I'm ready to upload those up to the site tonight. I'm just looking for some last minute news, and I'm sure there'll be some things that come up between now and when I launch them tonight or tomorrow morning, where we'll have to make some adjustments, some tweaks on player news that comes out. I think we got a good bit. And, let me just go ahead and address that real quick. That is one of the reasons I know we get some emails in. I get some emails in wanting to know why the projections take so long to come up. Why do we wait till Thursday to post them? And look, guys, it's a really simple answer. We're not trying to be the first site or the first resource to put projections up at the beginning of a week. It makes no sense to put up projections and then completely revise them a couple of days later. It doesn't work like that. We'd rather be as close to accurate as possible, as close to being having the news and tidbits with roster requirements, depth charts and whatnot updated. We'd rather do that and have as much for you guys set in stone on Thursday than to give you stuff on Tuesday, Wednesday, and have to rework, reconfigure, and recalibrate the projections. And that's why we wait until Thursday to post them. So they're coming for you. They'll be posted later tonight. And most of you guys probably won't get them until the morning, as you guys probably, I'm recording this on Wednesday. Most of you guys probably won't listen or see this until Thursday morning. So let's get right into the games, guys. We're going to go into the week 4 slate. Had to clear the vocal cords. Let's get ready to rock and roll. So we've got Marshall playing at Appalachian State. That's a game that's going to go on tomorrow night. That's the Thursday night matchup. So far, I've been spot on with the Marshall offense. I said in the beginning of the year, I liked the Marshall offense, thought they would open it up more. Quarterback Grant Wells, I believe, has thrown for over 330 yards in all 3 games this year. Interesting enough, Rasheen Ali, the running back, has been vulturing a lot of the touchdowns. So for as many yards as Grant Wells has actually passed for, he's only thrown for 4 TDs. So he's averaging 371 yards a game. He has thrown 5 picks, but he's thrown 4 interceptions, averaging 371 a game, and Rasheen Ali scoring 7 touchdowns so far this year has been the touchdown vulture in that offense. Of course, Cameron Peoples, Corey Sutton at wide receiver, worth a look there as well. Middle Tennessee State playing at Charlotte. Usual suspects here. I think there's some value for you DFS guys in the Middle Tennessee State receivers this week. Could be a little bit of a crapshoot there. Might be a little bit, I might need to look at it a little bit more before I see and throw out a couple of names. Maybe I'll pop into Discord over there tomorrow and tell you guys who I like as far as Middle Tennessee State receivers. But I do feel it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. I feel the same way with the Charlotte running backs as well. You've got Camp, you've got Shadrick Bird, and I just don't know if I'm ready to attach my hitch right now as I'm recording this onto one of those guys, going into that matchup. Wake Forest playing at Virginia. Virginia offense lighting it up. Great for Brennan Armstrong that they just do not have a rushing game. Wayne Tualapapa, I think he's in concussion protocol still. He's questionable this week. Probably Keaton Thompson, the Swiss Army knife, doing it as receiver, doing it as a runner as well. He'll be utilized quite a bit. Jelani Woods, Wicks, Billy Kemp, Henry, no shortage of options in that Virginia offense. Is this a week where we're going to see Jaquari Roberson maybe wake up? Will it be A.T. Perry? What about Christian Beal-Smith in that running game? I think he's a good play this week, but you've still got to worry about a little bit Ellison, Justice Ellison, and I just don't know if Beal-Smith's getting, even though I like him as a start, he's just not getting as many carries that I would like to see him get. Now, if he gets 19 carries again in the matchup against Virginia as he got against Florida State, I feel good when he ran for 95 yards and a touchdown. But, in that matchup, you had Christian Turner get 15 carries. You had Justice Ellison get 13. Was some of that a product of being out in front of Florida State? Probably so. That won't happen this week against Virginia. So it'll be interesting to see. I think Christian Beal-Smith is a good play. That Virginia defense didn't look too good against North Carolina, and that's a good thing, particularly if you have Brennan Armstrong and a part of that Virginia offense. You'd like to see Wake Forest score some points in that matchup as well. Liberty playing on the road at Syracuse. I think for Syracuse to have a shot in this game, Taj Harris needs to be healthy, and obviously Sean Tucker is going to have to get a lot of work here. Great matchup here if you've got Malik Willis, because this is a matchup that he is going to have to play the entire game, more than likely. Again, much like Middle Tennessee, Mike and I were talking earlier today, and I do feel that there is some value in the Liberty receivers. I don't know if DJ Stubbs will return. The inside receivers are valuable in that offense, but where the value lies this week, still to be determined, still trying to figure that out. I do like Douglas. If DJ Stubbs returns, that's a name that you've got to like as well, but let's make no mistake about it. Malik Willis is the horse that you want in that offense. He drives the machine, drives the car. And as long as he's healthy, I think you're going to see a ton of points by Malik Willis in that Liberty offense tomorrow. Question is whether or not Syracuse can do anything to contain them, and can they match them on the scoreboard and really continue to feed the ball to Sean Tucker, and will Taj Harris return to be able to get the catches in that offense to keep pace in the air? Because I'm not sure if he doesn't play, I'm not sure who they go to. And maybe their next best option is if Garrett Schrader gets there and they go with a 1-2 punch on the ground. We'll see there. It seems like both of those guys are playing between DeVito and Schrader. Maybe they rod the hot hand. UNLV playing on the road at Fresno State. I mentioned this in my notes and observations. Fresno State is for real. They went into Oregon, gave the Ducks everything that they could handle. I've been impressed by their defense as well. Considering what they did to that UCLA run game last week was really impressive. Fresno State tried to give the game away, came back and earned it in the end. I know Jake Hayner took a beating in that game. He was limping all around. He seemed in good spirits after the game when he was being interviewed. I don't think that there's any injury news or significant injury news in regards to Hayner, but I know he took some bumps and bruises, and hopefully they kind of lightened his load during the week. But I think you've got to love that Fresno State offense hosting UNLV this weekend, and UNLV offense really struggling to score points. I think really tough play if you've got Charles Williams this week for UNLV. Let's go into the Saturday games, and we're going to start off with Missouri at Boston College. And this is an interesting matchup here, because when I saw this line, I just really thought that it stunk. It was Missouri -2 on the road at Boston College. And let me just go ahead and say that having watched both of these teams and knowing that Phil Jurkovec, the quarterback for Boston College, is hurt, and I know Boston College didn't have to do much last weekend in that game, but the fact that they're only 1.5 2-point favorites in this home matchup against Missouri, that was the one that really stuck out at me. It's hard not to like Missouri in this matchup, and I have to tell you, if you part of the Discord and you're in the betting channel, this seems to be the Discord play of the week. It seems like everyone that is in the Discord betting channel, we're all on Missouri this week. And so that is the CFF Site's Discord betting channel play of the week. Get in. You might as well ride with us. Ride with the whole CFF Site Discord channel and go with Missouri this week at -1.5. It seems to be down right now, but Tyler Beatty, obviously, that's where Missouri is going to ride the offense. The question is, without Jurkovec, how does that affect Zay Flowers? How does that affect tight end Trey Barry? Were they playing it vanilla last week and not wanting to show their hand now that Jurkovec is out and the offense is turned over to Dennis Grossel? Did they play it vanilla last week and try to save some bullets in the chamber as regards to looks for Missouri this week? I don't know. That's hard to think, because Boston College, they've only been able to throw the ball so far. Now, will they be able to try? Will they try to run the ball against Missouri? That remains to be seen. So whether, Levy or Garwo or Sinkfield, whether they're able to do anything in the running game remains to be seen. But you would think it's going to be BC pass game versus Missouri run game. And it's obviously going to be a heavy dose of Tyler Beatty. And I think you've got a real dilemma on your hands if you've got maybe not Trey Barry. I think you start him, but whether or not you've got Zay Flowers, I know there's a lot of issues, some owners, whether or not they should hold on to Zay Flowers right now because of the way the offense looked last week without Jurkovec, who is going to miss the rest of the regular season. So this is a long-term move that you're trying to make. I think for those of you that held on to Zay Flowers, this will be a really telling week. Did they hold their cards close to the vest last week? in preparation for this matchup against Missouri. I think for you owners of Zay Flowers, we'll learn a lot this week after this matchup. Pitt at home against New Hampshire. What a week for Jordan Addison. He's already surpassed his 2020 touchdown total, and huge week last week. Home matchup against New Hampshire. Pitt just doesn't have much of a running game. I'm really curious to see if they try to establish the run game this week. I think here's my opinion. I think they really just need to shelve the running game for this week. A running game for the rest of the year. I think they just funnel the offense through Kenny Pickett. The passing game, they've got a deep core of receivers. The offense just never has really been able to develop a pure running back one, no matter who they want to put in that place, no matter who they want to say is at the top of the depth chart. Last week, I think it was AJ Davis that rode out. They rode with him. Let me just double check to make sure I'm stating the right Davis here. No, Vincent Davis. They wrote out Vincent Davis last week. He had 11 carries, and their supposed running back one, Israel Abanaconda, only had 1 carry. Now, was that by design? I don't know, but it just really doesn't seem right that the guy that is supposedly their number one running back only gets 1 carry. It was a back and forth matchup with Western Michigan. We'll see if the Panthers can kind of get that running game going a little bit this week, but I still expect to see heavy involvement in the pass game from Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison this week, even though they're playing an FCS team. I think Pitt comes out and scores a bunch of points early in that matchup. Temple playing at home against Wagner. Not much really to talk about in this matchup other than the fact that we don't know whether DeJuan Mathis is going to return here. Whether he does or not, it doesn't matter. You're not playing him this week. And I think this is a matchup most of you guys are just going to look over in fantasy. Richmond playing at Virginia Tech. The Hokies last week got bounced by West Virginia 27-21. And I think when you're looking at this matchup, I had high hopes for Braxton Burmeister after that opener against North Carolina. It seems like that offense has regressed a little bit since that opener. And if there's one play that I like in this offense right now, it's probably Raheem Blackshear. Blackshear last week, 47 carries and a touchdown, caught 4 passes for 31 yards. So if you're playing in a PPR league, I think Raheem Blackshear is probably the best play in this matchup. Bowling Green on the road at Minnesota. Trey Potts, unbelievable in the absence of Muhammad Ibrahim. And I think you roll with Potts in this matchup. The question is, and here's something too in the projections, and I'll kind of go ahead and throw this out. Coming off of a 30-0 win over Colorado, Chris Autman-Bell got in the action, 4 catches, 79 yards last week. I think this is a weekend they try to get him in the end zone in a sweet matchup against Bowling Green. And I think in addition to Potts, you get Chris Autman-Bell in your lineup as well. Ohio going on the road, playing at Northwestern. Wasn't much to talk about for Ohio last week, losing that game on the road at Louisiana Lafayette. If there's one thing that came out of that matchup, it was that it looks like O'Shan Allison is the better back between he and Demontre Tuggle. And I think as far as, he even looked better as a receiver out of the backfield as well. And I think in the case of Northwestern, a lot of high hopes for Evan Hull. I thought he would have done better in that matchup at Duke. Evan Hull, only 10 carries for 49 yards. And then the question is, who do they start at quarterback? Because Andrew Marty actually came in, carried the ball 7 times for 44 yards and a touchdown. I think he might get the nod this week to start at quarterback. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. I haven't looked into this today, so I haven't known if anything's updated. And we'll have to update the projections if anything comes in differently. But I'm approaching it as Marty, who threw for 150 and 2 touchdowns, ran for a score with 44 yards on the ground, as if he's going to go in as the starter this week. And then you've got Evan Hull with 10 carries last week. Andrew Clare had 5. Tyrus had 6. So it wasn't there really wasn't a huge separation in carries for Hull as I would have liked to have seen, but maybe a matchup against Ohio, allows the Wildcats to get things back on track this week. Villanova playing at Penn State. Villanova 3-0, FCS team. I don't really expect them to put up a big fight against Penn State. But look, this is a Villanova team that beat Richmond 34-27. Richmond's usually they're usually pretty decent FCS team. This Villanova team beat Bucknell 55-3. They beat Lehigh 47-3. And I'm not saying that Bucknell or Lehigh are any powerhouses, but those are impressive numbers for an FCS team. So this is one of the matchups where I don't like coming off of your FBS players, particularly if you do not have a penalty, because I can see a good week for, Jahan Dotson at wide receiver. I can see Noah Kane finding the end zone again. So I think this is a weekend. Sean Clifford as well. I think the big three for Penn State are going to have some nice numbers in this matchup, and I would not feel comfortable leaving them on the bench in this matchup against FCS opponent Villanova. Notre Dame playing on the road at Wisconsin. This is a little bit of a tough one here, because I think if there's three players that are intriguing, it's obviously Ches Malusi, the running back Wisconsin, it's Kyron Williams, the running back Notre Dame, and then it's also Michael Mayer, the tight end at Notre Dame. I don't think anybody's going to predict a shootout. You've got an over-under total of 46. So we're expecting maybe 3 touchdowns by each team, and that's if the game actually goes over. Those would be the 3 names I mentioned to you. Will be the only 3 players that I would probably start in this matchup. And so could be a defensive struggle here, 11 o'clock early start on Saturday morning in Wisconsin. Boise State playing at Utah State. And, first of all, let's just go ahead and mention Utah State. Devin Tompkins, has been absolutely on fire to start the year. I don't see any reason why that should stop. Calvin Tyler, the young running back, off to a nice start as well. The Aggies off to a 3-0 start. And really, getting a Boise State team that lost to Oklahoma State at home last week, 21-20, questionable calls in that matchup. When you look at the Boise State schedule and you think about the game that they blew to Central Florida in the opener where they had that big lead, they won by 40 games against UTEP. Very easily could have won that game against Oklahoma State. It looks like, I think they had a scoop 6 that was blown dead that would have scored. They had a missed field goal that would have taken the lead. Several opportunities. Boise State could be undefeated. And in my opinion, their offense just hasn't looked great. And I do have concerns for George Helene. And I was one of the guys at the beginning of the year that had high hopes for Helene this year, given the offensive coordinator's track record on how he uses his backs, particularly as receivers out of the backfield as well. But the one thing that you have to say about Helene is if he's not going to be healthy, then it's really, really hard to put a lot of faith in him. And so that is my concern with George Helene, is that he's just not going to be able to stay healthy. And then all of a sudden you've got, the Oregon transfer, Habibi Lakio, maybe vulturing some touchdowns away. I mean, Helene had 12 carries last week for 28 yards in a game that they would have probably have loved to have won against Oklahoma State, Power 5 opponent there. And you had Habibi Lakio had 8 carries, Helene 12. Whether or not he's fully healthy, I don't know. But if he's not, then why is he even playing? And so Helene, for me, is a guy, after I've seen him play a couple of games back from injury, I don't know if I have a lot of faith in him long-term. He's one of the guys that I would probably, if he were on my roster, would have jumped ship by now and let go and probably dipped into the waiver wire. Not one of those players, based on what I've seen so far, that I would hold right now. Florida International playing at Central Michigan. This is going to be a heavy dose, I'm assuming, of Lou Nichols in that running game for Central Michigan. Possibly Ja'Cory Sullivan, questionable receiver for Central Michigan. Going to be Devontae Price, more than likely, versus Lou Nichols in this matchup. I even think the backup running back for Central Michigan, Bracey, is out. So they'll go to the next best guy on there as well. That Central Michigan offense usually built for 2 backs, but I find that they're actually going to put the ball in the air a little bit more this year. However, with Sullivan possibly looking questionable to play, I don't know if that's going to be the case, and this could be more of a ground and pound matchup this weekend. Georgia, talk about ground and pound, playing at Vanderbilt. I don't really give the Commodores a shot in this game. Georgia right now, best defense in the country. JT Daniels, let's see if that offense can gel, get it together. Kearis Jackson came back last week as well. Let's see if Georgia can make improvements from their offense. I know that they played Clemson in the opener, but I do think if Georgia can make some improvements in that offense, then they're definitely the team to beat at the beginning of the year. Now, the one thing I had questions coming in on Zamir White earlier this week, and here's my take on Zamir White. At the onset of the season, I was definitely set that Zamir White was going to be the 75 to 80-yard, one touchdown running back every week. What you were going to get in Zamir White was going to be consistency. You're not going to get the 150 2 to 3 touchdown game from Zamir White. Georgia's just not built like that. They're too good, too deep, and most of the games they're going to be playing out ahead. They're not going to need Zamir White to ring up 20 carries. They just have a stable of backs, and given White's injury history, I think if you have White, you've got to be pleased and take your 75 yards, touchdown, maybe a catch or two every week, and just bank it and live with that and know that that's what you're probably going to get, and that's going to be his ceiling on a week-to-week basis. LSU playing on the road at Mississippi State. I think you're going to see a lot of balls in the air in this one, guys. Obviously LSU finding the running back that possibly they need in Corey Kiner, the young guy. And, over at the running backs at Mississippi State, there's not much of a running game. You're going to have Johnson, Jaquavius Marks. Both of those guys will be surprised if either one of them catches fewer than 6 passes. And I think this is going to be a big game for Kayshon Boutte. It is really tough to figure out the Mississippi State receivers right now. I think the best bet you have is if you're in PPR leagues, Makai Polk. Jaden Wally has been consistent. I think he might have caught a touchdown pass in all 3 games so far this year. Those would be your 2 consistent options in the Mississippi State receiving core. And then maybe you mix in possibly like Malik Heath in there as well, who caught 9 passes for 88 yards and a touchdown. For me, I think that's the big 3 at Mississippi State. I think you're looking at Polk, Wally, and Heath. And, when you're looking at Marks and Johnson in there, you had Austin Williams mixing with 6 catches last week. Jernigan and Calvin kind of fit in there for 3 catches each. When I look at these numbers, what it suggests to me is that you're looking at Polk, Heath, and Wally as the big 3 over at Mississippi State. Now, for LSU, they've had a lot of issues with receivers this year as well. You've got the youngster in there, Deion Smith, big week last week, 2 touchdown catches. You've got the tight end. Remember, Jack Besh caught 5 passes for 81 yards and a touchdown last week. He's now caught 4 passes in back-to-back games. And so you're getting contributions from the LSU receivers that we never saw or weren't expecting at the onset of the season. You had Coy Moore had 2 catches last week. Remember, with no Jontre Kirkland in. There's just a host of names for LSU. We could run down the list. At receiver, Jeray Jenkins hasn't played, right? I think there's some academic issues going on with him. Jontre Kirkland, Trey Palmer wasn't there last week. Did Trey Palmer I don't even think he played last week. So that receiving core now, you're starting to see some of the young guys emerge for LSU, and I think you're going to continue to see that as the season progresses, and I'm expecting a lot of points in that game for LSU, Mississippi State. LSU's defense doesn't seem to be as good as maybe I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. So I think there's going to be an opportunity for points on both sides of the ball, on both sidelines. Texas Tech going on the road to play at Texas. A little bit of a letdown if you were a owner of Eric Azakama, wide receiver for Texas Tech last week. I think he gets back on track. Casey Thompson, impressive in his performance, but let's be honest, let's be honest, it was against Rice. Rice, one of the worst teams, in my opinion, in the FBS that I've seen play so far this year. Xavier Worthy with a breakout performance. Will that continue? Will we get consistency from him? That remains to be seen. I do think he's the most talented receiver on the Texas roster, and I do think they're going to find ways to continue to get him the ball on a consistent basis. And I would not be surprised if there's some guys out there that roll with Xavier Worthy. If he were on my roster in a deep league, I'd be starting him as well in also Bijan Robinson as well. The concern on the Texas Tech side is a little bit more, I think, at running back. You had Roderick Thompson come back last week. They found a way to get him in the end zone in that 54-21 win over Florida International. But Taj Brooks only 9 carries for 47 yards. Xavier Whitehead 7 carries. Townsend had 5. Roderick Thompson 4. Was it a product of the scoreboard? That remains to be seen. But I'm more curious to know if they're going to get Thompson involved more in the offense as he recovers from his injury and gets more healthy. And if so, that hurts the fantasy value and the fantasy appeal of Taj Brooks. SMU playing on the road at TCU. I think for many of you fantasy owners, this is a fantasy delight matchup. Tanner Mordecai and that SMU offense has looked absolutely lights out on fire. They're stepping up in competition this week, though, playing on the road at TCU. Quentin Johnston getting on track. There was some early preseason hype for him. And that came, that showed through in their last matchup last week. Should be a lot of points in this one. I don't think that TCU is going to be able to slow down SMU. I think SMU is going to be able to put up some points and some yards, and that has to make you happy if you're an owner of Max Duggan and Quentin Johnston. And let's see if the Horned Frogs are going to ride Zach Evans at running back. Remember, coming off of a big game, will we get back-to-back big performances from Zach Evans? And if we do, we may finally get the answer to whether or not the Horned Frogs are going to ride out a number one running back. Remember, at the beginning of the year, I predicted that Evans was either going to be a 700 to 800 yard back or that 11 to 1300 yard back, because they were either going to committee it or they were going to, let Evans carry the load. This game could tell us what we need to move into the heart of the season and know whether or not TCU's offense is going to ride Evans as a running back one exclusively throughout the year. Miami of Ohio on the road at Army. Tough Army defense playing Miami of Ohio. If there's one start for Miami of Ohio, I think it would be Jack Sorensen, who will have the opportunity to make a few plays downfield against this Army defense, who did give up a few plays down the field to Western Kentucky. Bailey Zappi, Jareth Stearns, and maybe Jack Sorensen can have some success against Army in a game I don't expect Miami of Ohio to win, but I do think that they could put up some points, if not early, maybe late. And Sorensen would be the guy that you would want in that matchup. Miami of Florida, Miami hosting Central Connecticut State. And so we know that De'Aaron King is banged up. I don't expect De'Aaron King to play in this matchup. If I had to predict a quarterback in this matchup, it would be Van Dyke for Miami. Interesting thing on the Miami side is that they are depleted at running back. With Chaney out, you've still got Knighton out, I believe. I think he's out this game as well. And, is it going to be a case where they just ride Cam Harris? But how do you ride Cam Harris in a matchup against Central Connecticut State? But Miami doesn't have many running backs right now that they can plug in. So that's why I think you go with Cameron Harris. Even in this easy matchup, I think this is a good matchup for the Miami defense. And I think if I were, obviously you've got Charleston Rambo that's coming off of a big game. I might be tempted to play some of the Miami players in this matchup, particularly Rambo at receiver, just because I think, if King is out, because I don't expect him to play in this matchup, I think they're going to have to find some ways to kind of break out and get on the scoreboard early. I think they ride Cameron Harris early. So I think if you have him, you get him in this matchup. You start the Miami defense, and that's what I like. And I do think you can roll the dice with Charleston Rambo, even though De'Aaron King won't be starting. UMass playing on the road at Coastal Carolina. Running back roulette at Coastal Carolina right now. It seemed like Reese White had sort of cemented himself in that running back one role in that game against Kansas. And then Shamari Jones comes through with a 100-yard game last week. And I think that's what you're going to see. I think you're going to see Coastal Carolina ride out the hot hand right now. Remember, CJ Marable's not there. They had Marable there for 3-4 years. They had their reliable, trustworthy running back one. It looks like now they're going to ride it out with maybe the hot hand, take the committee approach, And I think it's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot with Shamari Jones and Reese White as well. And I think what you have to hope for at this particular point is that if you start one, you've got to hope that both guys are going to go for at least 80 yards and a touchdown after the first 3 games of the season. It's a little bit more, it seems it's a little more dicier than that. It seems like it's going to be a boom or bust on one of those running backs every week. We're going to see if that continues to play out this weekend against UMass. But this would be a matchup where you would think both guys would get at least 70 yards and a touchdown in this matchup. Toledo on the road at Ball State. Bryant Koback, for me, is a must start. Ball State offense has to get back on track. Justin Hall, for me, is a must start. Be curious to see what happens with that Ball State offense. It seems like we may be getting Carson Steele as the running back 1 at Ball State, or at least their best fantasy back. He has now scored a touchdown in 3 straight games and has gone over the 70-yard mark in 2 of the first 3 games this year. Texas State on the road, traveling up to Michigan to play Eastern Michigan. The question is, has Ben Bryant taken over for Preston Hutchinson at quarterback? It seems likely, as much so that you cannot take a chance on starting either guy right now. I just think it's too dicey. If you have Preston Hutchinson, that's one right now. I mentioned whether you should hold or jump ship. He's a guy that I would definitely be jumping ship on right now. I just haven't seen anything from him through 3 games to think that he's going to be anything like what he was last year, producing fantasy points. And so over on the Texas State side, obviously you're going to go with Marcel Barbie, the big receiver at Texas State, who's probably, and more than likely, if they're scoring a passing touchdown, he's going to be on the receiving end of it. And so he's a must start as well. San Jose State traveling across. Remember, they played at Hawaii last week. They're going up to Michigan this week. So the Spartans travel to Michigan. A lot of fantasy owners were burned last week, including myself, when Tyler Nevins was announced as a late scratch. The announcers didn't even know that he didn't even seem like they knew that he wasn't playing, because they made a reference that Kyrie Robinson looked like coaches wanted to get him off to a fast start since he was slow out of the gate for the season, almost as if they knew something, that they were trying to predict something that they didn't know. And then all of a sudden we find out that Tyler Nevins wasn't even suited up. And that was the reason why Robinson was out there getting that early run. Western Michigan, a lot of you guys can thank me for the reverse jinx for Caleb Ellaby. I mentioned last week, I just didn't see anything so far, at least through the first 2 games, that were promising for Caleb Ellaby and that Western Michigan offense. But boy, it came to life last week. Sky Moore returned. You've got Corey Crooms, Ladarius Jefferson and Sean Tyler making a 1-2 punch in that Western Michigan backfield. I think it's going to be a really tough game for San Jose State traveling across country, coming up against a matchup against a Broncos offense that last week just couldn't be stopped. Ellaby threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then you got Crooms, you've got Sky Moore, you've got Jalen Hall, 3 good targets there for Ellaby to throw to. And I just think that San Jose State's going to have a hard time matching points on the scoreboard with Western Michigan. Maine on the road playing at Northern Illinois. And I have to say, for all of you fantasy owners of Harrison Whaley, I said it at the beginning of the year, these were the matchups you were waiting for Northern Illinois to get to. Yes, they were, they played Michigan last week. Whaley had run for 144 against Georgia Tech, 179 against Wyoming, and those were no cupcake opponents for Northern Illinois. So yes, he did only run for 34 yards against Michigan, but if he's healthy, you would expect Northern Illinois to want to get a win out of this game. And I would think this would be a big week for Harrison Whaley. I think it might be even bigger if you're an owner of Tyrese Ritchie, though, who's had a little bit of a slow start. And so I think if you own Tyrese Ritchie, I think this is where you really want to see some progression. Opener, 64 yards against Georgia Tech, 40 yards against Wyoming. He had negative yards the last week against Michigan and has still yet to find the end zone. And so I think this is a bigger game for you owners of Tyrese Ritchie, who are still holding on right now. And, my suggestion with him was also to hold, but I think this matchup against Maine could tell us a lot of how they're going to utilize him going into the season. Washington State playing at Utah. Questions going into this matchup. Will Jaden DeLaura be healthy going into this matchup? And I don't really think it matters. There's only two, give me Calvin, give me the inside receivers, right? Travell Harris and Calvin Turner for Washington State. Maybe mix in Max Borgi. I'm sorry, Calvin Jackson at Washington State. Mix in Max Borgi as well, but I think this is a tough matchup for him going against a Utah defense that I think is pretty darn good. Now, the big news coming out of Utah was that Charlie Brewer, no longer with the program. Cameron Rising likely takes over at quarterback. And after what I saw from Cameron Rising last week, I think he's a sleeper play this week going up against that Washington State offense, particularly if he uses his legs. And I think this is also going to be a big week for fantasy owners of Micah Bernard. You jumped on him early in the draft, particularly if you drafted early. You might have come off of him once we started getting news of Tavion Thomas doing well in preseason camp. Tavion Thomas looks like he got the first snap to start the season, put the ball on the ground a couple of weeks ago. That kind of opened the door for Micah Bernard, who we know that the coaches liked throughout the summer going into the season. Maybe this is the game that Micah Bernard has his breakout. Maybe this is the game where he establishes himself as running back one, and Utah starts to iron out the wrinkles a little bit. That's probably happening at quarterback now with Brewer moving on and Cameron Rising settling in. Let's see now if they can settle on a running back and if Micah Bernard can make the most of his opportunities and run with that job. Louisville playing on the road at Florida State. Let's be honest here. I don't know. That Florida State offense is a little unpredictable for me. Who are we going to get at quarterback? I don't know if I mentioned this in my news and notes, and I don't know if I mentioned this on the show last week, but this is my opinion. I don't think Mackenzie Milton is a great story. The comeback story is great. I'm happy for the kid. I really am. I don't think he's a good quarterback. I think he's just been away too long. I think he's too rusty. I think I think Florida State's offense is better with Jordan Travis at quarterback. And I don't even think he's the ideal quarterback for that system. But I think their offense is just better and more relevant when Jordan Travis can use his legs and kind of be two-dimensional in that offense. I know that's not the quarterback that Norvell wants, but it's what he's got. And I think Travis is better than Mackenzie Milton when it comes to leading the offense down the field and putting them in position to score points and put points on the scoreboard. Florida State got handed by Wake Forest last week, 35-14. There can't be much optimism in Florida State, particularly after the loss the week before against an FCS opponent. I don't know how much patience that fans are going to have for Norvell there at Florida State. But I'm going to tell you, if Florida State doesn't turn it around this year, that program is just, it's a sleeping giant. And I just can't imagine that program is going to stay dormant for too long before they flip the switch on a coach again. And it's just, it's very unfortunate that Norvell hasn't been able to find the quarterback that I think he needs to lead that offense. Kent State playing on the road at Maryland. The Terrapins 3-0. Kent State 1-2. I have been a little disappointed in the Kent State offense, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the year. It wasn't going to be till the middle of the year when Kent State got out of some of these non-conference games where they were going to start making some progression and scoring and producing some fantasy points. I just don't know if they have the receiving core. They have Crum at quarterback, but can he get they have been playing without Jayshon Polk, right? Do they have enough at receiver to spread the ball around to really make this offense work? I'm not sure that's going to happen this weekend at Maryland. And Maryland's no juggernaut, right? So I don't see where they're going to be able to shut Kent State down. I do think Kent State's going to score some points. But other than Crum right now, the most consistent players on offense may be Cooper and Williams, the backs, who have over 160 yards each, but Cooper's only found the end zone one time. And, Williams hasn't even scored a touchdown yet. So you've got, Abram with 10 catches, 100. He's coming off of a 130-yard game at Iowa. So, he's got the hot hand right now. You've got Quentin Johnston, the Syracuse transfer. He's caught 5 passes in the last 2 games. He's caught a touchdown in one of those last 2, but his high is only 55 receiving yards. Dante Cephas, who I was high on maybe as establishing as one of those top targets on the outside. He had 2 catches for 54 yards against VMI, but it was VMI. Against Iowa, 2 catches, 8 yards. Texas A&M, 3 catches, 21 yards. Let's see. Look, this defense, Maryland's defense, is not Iowa. It's not Texas A&M. It's going to be somewhere in the middle between VMI and Texas A&M. That's good news if you have Kent State players. I just, maybe this is the matchup Kent State needs, like Western Michigan needed last week against that Pitt matchup where they exploded. Maybe this is the matchup Kent State needs to kind of get things going as they move into conference play. But I haven't really liked what I've seen from Kent State so far through 3 games. Whereas I do like what I see at Maryland. Running back Fleet Davis, Raheem Jarrett, Dante Demas, all good fantasy plays this weekend. I don't know about Tagovailoa. I'm not sure, depending on what you have on your bench, if he's the play that I really like. But I do like Demas. I do like Jarrett. I do like the potential for both of those guys, once again, to possibly have 100 yards and a touchdown in this matchup. And I think you go with Fleet Davis. I think you go with Demas. And I think you go with Jarrett. You start all 3 if you have any of those guys on your roster. Clemson on the road playing at North Carolina State. I think if you have, Uunglele, the quarterback, DJ Uunglele, I think that for me, he's a hold. And for me, I think if you have him on your roster this week and you don't have a better option, I think you have to roll the dice, and I think you have to play him. I feel like it's only a matter of time. Look, Lynn J. Dixon, I mentioned this in the preseason, sometimes transfer. I was really shocked that Lynn J. Dixon didn't transfer out of the program after Kobe Pace had a big spring game, and there was a lot of hype leading up to Kobe Pace. Will Shipley gets there. He gets a lot of hype in the fall. He had the breakout game last week, and now Lynn J. Dixon finally decides to pull the plug on his Clemson career. That's great if you have Will Shipley, I think, who looks like he's going to be the running back 1 at Clemson. Now, can they get DJU in that passing game and get Justin Ross and Joseph Nagata? Can they get going this week against NC State? Remember, this is a road game at NC State. NC State sometimes plays Clemson tough, but remember, this is the same NC State team that gave up a lot of passing yards to Mississippi State a couple of weeks ago, and had it handed to them at Mississippi State. So I do think that there is really some potential here in this Clemson offense that we're sleeping on this week in this matchup at North Carolina State. Speaking of sleeping offenses, Colorado State traveling to play at Iowa. That Iowa team really impresses me. And I have to tell you, with Dante Wright questionable to play for Colorado State, I'm not sure. I don't know if I can see the Rams scoring a touchdown in this matchup. I just don't think that this is a game where David Bailey and that running game is really going to be able to impose their will against the physicality of Iowa's defense. And really, Colorado State's offense is one-dimensional. It's basically run the ball and get it to Trey McBride. Really, that's the game plan if you're the Colorado State offense. And they've been able to do that. McBride with 3 consecutive 100-yard games to start the year. But this Iowa defense is another beast. And I think they'll be looking to shut down the run game. They'll be looking to shut down Trey McBride. And they'll try to make Todd Centeio beat them. And I just don't think – I think this one could get ugly. I just don't know. Matter of fact, this is one of the ones I like. Iowa, I think, was a 22-point favorite. I just don't know how Colorado State's going to score many points in this matchup. And so I do like the Hawkeyes big in this one. And I do like David Bailey. He's a bench this week, in my opinion. But I do think if you require a tight end, it's impossible to sit Trey McBride at this particular point. One of the best fantasy tight ends in the country. Rutgers on the road playing at Michigan. I mean, what more can you say about the Michigan offense and the run game? Blake Corum, Hassan Haskins, definitely a great 1-2 punch. It's the only thing that I'm rolling with in this game this week. Illinois playing at Purdue. The big question going into this matchup, will David Bell be able to graduate from concussion protocol and be able to play? That's the big question right now. I've got Bell projected to play because I think you have to project Bell in that Purdue offense as if he's going to play. So pay attention to the number 2 and number 3 receivers in those projections, because those are the guys that will probably spike up, whose numbers spike up if we don't get Bell, if Bell does not play this weekend. And more than likely, those projections may not get updated, because there's a good chance there's a good chance Bell may not even clear concussion protocol until Friday or even Saturday morning. And so it's too late to make changes at that particular point. So that's something that you guys have to follow along in the Discord server on the injury channel. There's a lot going on Saturday mornings in the Discord server. Haven't even mentioned it yet on this show, and didn't even mention it on much of last show. But Saturday mornings, that Discord server is absolutely popping on fire. And if part of your membership was an invite to that Discord server, you're missing one hell of a resource. Get in, send me an email, make sure you get the invite. I'll double check your account and resend that to you. And if you don't have an account and a membership and you want to upgrade or whatever, get into that Discord, I suggest you get in. It's almost, I think it's 700 people in there, and there's a lot of regulars that get in there and post a lot of thoughts, a lot of team news. There's team pages everywhere, fans from around the country that know their teams better than sometimes Mike and I even know them. And sometimes we get useful tidbits from them, guys going to games, checking out pregame, seeing who's dressed, who's not, who's participating in warmups. A lot of good stuff comes out of that Discord, and it is worth its weight in gold. You get a lot of good nuggets in that Discord. So that is my sell piece for the show. Texas A&M playing on the road at Arkansas. KJ Jefferson, I think it's going to come down to how can KJ Jefferson operate the offense against that Texas A&M defense. Will Texas A&M look? Zach Calzada held his own last week, passing the ball. If Calzada can repeat that performance from last week and carry that same confidence into this matchup against Arkansas, I can see Texas A&M coming out with a win using the 1-2 punch of Isaiah Spiller and Devin Achane in that run game. And I think not only Achane, but I think Aeneas Smith, the wide receiver, all those guys should be playing this weekend in that matchup. Iowa State playing on the road at Baylor. Interesting matchup here because Iowa State, obviously, they whooped up on UNLV last week. They're playing on the road at Baylor. That looks improved this year. But let's consider this, guys. Baylor beat Texas State 29-20 in the opener, Texas Southern 66-7, and then whooped up at Kansas on 45-7. Whipped up on Kansas 45-7. Baylor has been untested so far this year. This is a game that really, when I look at Iowa State -7 at Baylor right now, this is a line that I really like and something that I'm interested in. But I do think you've got Breece Hall, you ride him, Xavier Hutchinson as well, get him in your lineup. And I think even though Baylor's schedule has been light, I do think given the start that Abram Smith has had, 3 straight games over 100 yards, at least 118 in all 3 of those games, 5 touchdowns in 3 games, multiple touchdowns in 2 of the 3. You've got to start him in this matchup against Iowa State and hope that he finds the end zone in a 4th consecutive game against the Cyclones. Townsend on the road playing at San Diego State. This is the one matchup here, one of those FBS versus FCS matchups where I'm a little bit concerned because how long and how effective will San Diego State's offense be? That will determine how long probably the offense rides Greg Bell before they start turning a few of the other guys loose and kind of get some other guys into the action and preserve Greg Bell. There's no way that Bell should be getting 20 carries, maybe even 15 to 17 carries in this game. I wouldn't be surprised if Greg Bell gets 12 to 15 carries tops, gets his 100 yards and a touchdown and gets out of there. I think that's the ceiling for Greg Bell this week. 100 yards, maybe 2 touchdowns would be the ceiling. And you know, the thing that could determine that as well is who actually is going to play quarterback for the Aztecs. Because if Brookshire's back, you know, if Lucas Johnson is the quarterback and under center again for San Diego State, you're probably going to see a more run heavy approach, and you're more likely to see Bell get more work on the ground for a lot longer than if Brookshire plays. Now, if Brookshire plays, I do think that they're still going to stay run heavy, but the ability to throw the ball is a little bit better with Brookshire. Even though they're both only completing 50% of their passes, I think that San Diego State will make a bigger commitment to the run game if Lucas Johnson is the quarterback. So we'll see, and that's news that we'll watch out as well. But I still think either way, you've got to start Greg Bell at running back this week and get him in, because I do think the potential for 100 yards and a touchdown is certainly there. UTSA on the road at Memphis. I think this is going to be one of the more intriguing matchups of the weekend. I like Frank Harris. I like that UTSA offense. I like Sincere McCormick at running back. I think Zachary Franklin is a very, very underrated fantasy receiver. I think we've got him near the top 10 this week. When you look at Zachary Franklin, 3 consecutive games with a touchdown. He's gone over 100 yards and 8 catches in 2 of those 3. He went for 477 and a touchdown against Lamar. They didn't need him against Lamar. So in the games that they've needed Zachary Franklin, he's caught at least 8 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown. They're going to need him this week against Memphis. And so I think he's definitely a must start as well with Sincere McCormick. Now, when you take a look at Memphis, and I mentioned this in my news and notes over the weekend, when you look at that 31-29 win over Mississippi State, yeah, this is sort of like the Boise State, Oklahoma State game. A call or two, missed call or two here or there could have turned the game. That's irrelevant. All we care about is fantasy points. I think looking at the Memphis schedule, Hennigan, Brandon Thomas, Calvin Austin, must plays for the rest of the year, every game from here on out, at least Thomas and at least Austin. I think Hennigan's going to be a nice matchup play. But when I look at that Memphis schedule through the rest of the year after UTSA, Temple, maybe at Tulsa would be the road bump. They get Navy at home. They go to Central Florida that doesn't have Dylan Gabriel anymore. They get SMU at home, shootout, East Carolina at home, at Houston, and then they get Tulane at home. All games that Memphis is going to have to score points in. I do think Calvin Austin is going to end up finishing the year as I would not be surprised if he ends up finishing the year as our number 1 fantasy receiver. And I could say that pretty confidently now after watching that Memphis offense through the first 3 weeks of the season. Wyoming playing at Connecticut. I mentioned this as well. I would be surprised if Connecticut going into last week, if Connecticut was going to score more than 5 offensive touchdowns against FBS opponents. I think I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. They scored 2, I believe, last week against Army. One was in mop-up time. They did get a defensive touchdown. They get Wyoming at home. Maybe the change from Edsel to the new coaching staff will help Connecticut, but I don't think they're going to be much improved anyway. I think Wyoming runs all over them. You get Xavier Valladay in your lineup this week. Kansas on the road at Duke. Look, if you're a Duke, if you've got Mateo Durant, all you want Kansas to do is score enough points to stay in this game so Durant can really pound out and get as close to 200 yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns as possible. He has that potential this week in that matchup. And I do think that 150 yards is definitely doable for Durant, and a couple of scores is definitely doable. I think this could be a really big week for him. And he's right now is just hot. When you look at his numbers over the first 3 weeks of the season, let's just pull up Durant real quick and take a look at him. He's got 398 yards, 255 on the road at Charlotte. Then he went for 41 against NC-A&T. They didn't need him. He scored 3 touchdowns anyway. And then Northwestern last week, 22 carries, 102 yards in a touchdown. This matchup against Kansas has 150 yards and 2 touchdowns written all over it. I hope I didn't just jinx you guys, but that's what it looks like to me, certainly on paper. Georgia State on the road at Auburn, and Georgia State's offense right now is a mess. You know, they made the switch at quarterback. Dustin Coates fumbled last week. Tucker Gregg already had to start. That didn't help Coates anymore. Gregg's probably definitely the starter now. I don't know what's going on at wide receiver. That Georgia State offense is a shell of what it was a year ago. this matchup against Auburn isn't going to make things any easier. And I think if you're a fantasy owner of Tank Bigsby, all you really want to do is see Georgia State put up a few points in this game just so Bigsby gets in there and plays long enough to get his 100 yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns. I think what's really interesting, and I think I mentioned this in my news and notes last week, one of the more impressive takeaways from the Penn State Auburn game was watching Jacquez Hunter. If you don't have him on a roster right now and you're in a keeper league, go get this guy. He's going to be the next good running back after Bigsby. He's the next in line. He is going to be a stud. Go get Jacquez Hunter. That's my advice for you guys in keeper leagues that have Hunter still out there on the waiver wire. Arkansas State at Tulsa. I think I referenced the Arkansas State in my concern last week going on the road to Washington. That played out as I thought. We still don't know what we're going to get at quarterback, and that's a concern. But I do think Hunt, I do think Rucker and Foreman are your top 3 at Arkansas State. You've got to roll with them. I think this is a great matchup for Deneric Prince. I think this is an under-the-radar play this week. Deneric Prince could explode against Arkansas State in this matchup. Tulsa 0-3, trying to get right, trying to get their first win. Look out for Deneric Prince in a big game on the ground this week. UCLA playing at Stanford. Big news is Austin Jones will not be available for this matchup. I have concerns about Austin Jones anyway. Nathaniel Pete kind of putting up some better numbers right now. Well, it looks like Pete will get the start against UCLA, and I was just surprised that UCLA's offense was shut down as much as it was against Fresno State. UCLA only scored enough points because scored the points that they did last week because Fresno tried to give them the game. But I think this is a get-right game for UCLA, Zach Charbonnet, Britton Brown in that UCLA run game, and they're able to get things going on the road at Stanford. Charleston Southern playing at East Carolina. I think you go ahead and get Holton Ahlers in your lineup. I think this could be a good week for, if you're playing in a deep league for at running back this week with Keaton Mitchell and Rajay Harris. I think if you've got one of those 2 backs and you're playing in a deep league, maybe they're some type of a flex material. Maybe Tyler Snead get in there at receiver. Louisiana Lafayette playing on the road at Georgia Southern. I think the big news coming out, I mentioned this in my news and notes as well over the weekend, that in that matchup against Miami of Ohio, you've got Chris Smith, you've got Amani Bailey, and you've got Montrell Johnson for Louisiana Lafayette, the freshman. Montrell Johnson from around the New Orleans area. He had 4 rushing touchdowns against Ohio in that game on Thursday night. The interesting thing was that two of those, I think two of the rushing touchdowns, or maybe even 3, were 1-yard plunges. And it seems to me that the Raging Cajuns are going to be giving the ball to Montrell Johnson around the goal line. And if they do that, given the way that they're sharing the carries, he might be the back to own in that Louisiana Lafayette offense. Not much for me from Georgia Southern to even look at right now, and I'm kind of skipping over them. Buffalo playing on the road at Old Dominion. I think really what you're looking at for Buffalo, if you have, this is Kevin Marks' conversation, right? Last week, Dylan McDuffie, 15 carries, 92 yards and a touchdown. Kevin Marks against Coastal Carolina, 20 carries, 64 yards and a touchdown. So Marks got 20 carries. McDuffie got 15. That was a great matchup, a good matchup, I thought, for Marks. But if they're going to split carries like this, and Marks is a little banged up, I do expect to see more of a 50-50 split, at least through the short term, until Marks becomes completely healthy. But as long as McDuffie is producing the way that he is, I do expect to see these carries split. Maybe there might be a slight lean to give more carries to Marks, but I think McDuffie is going to get more work than what we originally thought. And we went into the season thinking that Ron Cook Jr. was going to be the running back too over at Buffalo, but it seems to be McDuffie, and he seems to have worked his way and earned his way into a nice share of split carries with Kevin Marks. And I think that's only going to continue this weekend in the matchup at Old Dominion. Texas Southern playing at Rice. Not much to mention here, but I will make a bold prediction, and that is we have the number 1 tight end on our board for me this week is Jordan Myers. And the reason why I say Jordan Myers is the number 1 tight end going into this week is he's averaging about 3.5, 4 catches a game, right? He's caught a touchdown pass already this year, but he's actually one of their better rushers as well. So they're using him as a rusher and receiver. Last week's matchup against Texas, he had 7 carries for 41 yards. Before that, I think he's already scored a rushing touchdown for Rice's offense as well. And there's not many weeks where Jordan Myers is going to be sitting at the top of our tight end board, but look at Rice and the matchup against Texas Southern. And how do you not like that? It's the greatest thing about college fantasy football is playing the matchups. And this is a weekend you get to go out, grab a guy like Jordan Myers, plug him in, and it makes you look really smart. And I think he's going to be one of the top tight end plays this weekend. Kansas State playing on the road at Oklahoma State. Obviously, Deuce Vaughn, heavy dose of Deuce Vaughn if you're the Kansas State offense. Oklahoma State this weekend. The question is, will they get the receivers back? Jaden Bray, Tay Martin. How will their receivers look going into this weekend's matchup? That's been the really, tough part, particularly you owners of Tay Martin that got off to a really good start. And then he's been MIA for the last couple of weeks. The greatest thing to happen with Oklahoma State is the emergence of Jaylen Warren, the former Utah State running back, went into Boise last week, hung a 200 spot up on the Broncos defense. And I think now, and look, we kind of saw that coming because the week before he looked good in the second half of the game against Boise State. He explodes 218 yards and a touchdown. And you would think that they're going to ride Jaylen Warren this weekend at home against Kansas State. Nebraska playing on the road at Michigan State. Kenneth Walker III continues to do his thing. Questions there at Nebraska where Gabe Irvin's going to be out for a little bit. Who's going to play running back there? I think there's more to talk about with Michigan State right now than Nebraska. When you look at that Michigan State offense as well, you got Jalen Naylor. He's caught a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 games. You got Trey Mosley, who's gone over 50 yards in 2 of the last 3. You've got Jaden Reed, who's caught 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. One of those, he went over 180 yards. He's caught at least 3 passes in every game. So there are options in that Michigan State offense if you play in a Power 5 only league, not only at the run game with Kenneth Walker III, but also in the passing game, if you could take a shot on one of those receivers as well. North Texas on the road playing at Louisiana Tech. I think this is a really good matchup for Austin Kendall, who I have near the top 10 this week in fantasy quarterbacks. North Texas really struggling. It'll be interesting to see if the Mean Green can get things going. The problem is they've just never been able to find a quarterback since Mason Fine's departure, and that's really hurt the offense. Much like I mentioned Florida State earlier in the show, I think North Texas, another team, another offense where the head coach, Seth Luttrell, just has not been able to find the quarterback that he needs to lead that offense. And I don't know whether or not that's one of the guys he has on the roster right now. Now, Jace Ruder is young. There's a lot of eligibility left, and they do need to get healthy. I mean, you're missing playmakers sometimes like Jair Shorter and Tommy Bush. They've got talent, but can they get it to gel together? And that's the question. I just think North Texas is struggling. This is a great matchup if you have Louisiana Tech, particularly quarterback Austin Kendall this week. Tennessee playing on the road at Florida. And we get to talk about Emory Jones again. And I made a bold prediction last week that I thought Emory Jones would no longer be the starter after the Alabama game. And then we get word that Anthony Richardson wasn't even going to play in that game. And Emory Jones held his own and damn near led an upset win against Alabama. And so I've had to revise my prediction because Richardson did not even get to play against Alabama, and Emory Jones didn't exactly look terrible. This could be a worst case scenario for you owners of Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson, which I'm one of those guys because I have them both in a best ball. I don't want them both to do well. I want one guy to really stink and the other guy to be the starter. But it doesn't look like that's happening right now. And so the question is, will we continue to see a split as we did through the first 2 games of the season until Anthony Richardson didn't play in the game against Alabama? And I think that's what might happen because, you never know with Dan Mullen. The guy's a genius. He's a great play caller. He comes up with some tremendous schemes. The guy, look, they hadn't thrown a ball to a tight end leading up to the game against Alabama. And I think they combined for 8 catches against Alabama. So the guy just knows how to come up with a game plan. The question is, I don't know if we're going to see Anthony Richardson now start. I think we're going to see Emory Jones, because now that wrinkle may come out when they play Georgia, because let's be honest, Florida didn't need to beat Alabama. The one game that Florida has to win, it's Georgia, because they could have beaten Alabama and lose to Georgia. Georgia runs the table. Georgia's in the SEC championship. Georgia's playing to go to the college football playoff. Florida loses to Alabama and beats Georgia. All of a sudden, now they're in the catbird seat and they have an argument now. So, and they can make the SEC title game. So the game against Bama wasn't the game that Florida needed to win. The game against Georgia is the game that Florida actually needs to win, as long as they each team runs the table. So, but the news for me, for Florida, the verdict, revised prediction on the quarterbacks. I think we're going to see more of a split. And I think that that's bad news if you have Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson. It's really unfortunate. And, you know, I don't want to go too long without mentioning this, but the guy that's completely under the radar in all this quarterback talk is Damian Pierce, who has scored 5 touchdowns in the first 3 games of the year. The guy does not have more than 55 yards rushing in any of the 3 games this year, but he has scored double-digit touchdowns in 2 of the 3 games. Malik Davis has gone over 80 yards and scored a touchdown in 2 of 3 games. And those were 2 decent opponents this year. That's what we're missing in this quarterback talk, is that there's actually some fantasy production coming from the Florida running backs, which is something that we haven't seen maybe since LaMichael Pirine a couple of years ago. So that Florida run game really has things going now. And I think there's some other players to talk about than to just discuss Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson. Kentucky playing on the road at South Carolina. I'm still not feeling that South Carolina offense right now. Kevin Harris, I just think too much rotation, until they show me that they're going to ride him. He's one of the guys that I'm really looking to jump ship on. And for you guys that are holding on to Kevin Harris, I think this is a make or break week. There's not going to be too many matchups that are going to be, the matchups aren't going to get any better for South Carolina. I just think that this is a week where you're going to probably be able to decide what to do with Kevin Harris. And for you Kentucky guys, hopefully that offense gets back on track. Chris Rodriguez, after a down week last week, and really a surprising down week, that 28-23 win over Chattanooga, where they really hung on. And I think it was the defensive touchdown that really did it for him. So we'll see if Rodriguez can get rolling again. Navy on the road playing at Houston. The question is whether or not Clayton Tune is going to be healthy. And, my prediction on this is I don't know if Clayton Tune, whether or not he's healthy, is going to get the start anyway. Clayton Tune this year, he's got 4 interceptions. He's thrown 5 interceptions so far last year. Let's look at Tune's numbers over the last few years. In 2018, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. 2019, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. 2020, 13 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. This year, 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. The guy over the last 3 seasons has thrown 28 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. That's just not going to work. I don't care if Clayton Tune is healthy or not. I think you've got to get Ike Ogbogu a chance to start here in this matchup. The guy came in, played against Grambling. I get it. 14 of 22, 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. But you know what that was? That was a preseason performance. You see what you've got in him. I think you have to give that guy a shot. And this matchup against Navy is probably what he needs, because Navy doesn't look too good either, but it's a step up from Grambling. And so now you've got a quarterback that you can progressively work into the system. And now you went from maybe a preseason matchup to a nice, went from a scrimmage. This is a nice matchup tune-up for them to get into the heart of conference, and probably the best case scenario for Houston if they're going to make a change at Houston at quarterback this week. And I think that would certainly benefit anyone that jumped on Alton McCaskill at running back. He went over 114 and 2 touchdowns last week, 2 consecutive weeks with at least 2 touchdowns. Remember, he had 3 the week before. He totaled 91 yards of offense, and I think he's emerging as a playmaker in that offense as well. So we see that Houston offense possibly turning a corner if they make a change at quarterback. North Carolina playing on the road at Georgia Tech. Yellow Jackets did a great job holding Clemson in check last week. Remember, that was the same Yellow Jackets defense that got beat up by Northern Illinois just a couple of weeks ago. And in North Carolina, obviously, they found the offense after that disappointing opener against Virginia Tech. Sam Howell has been absolutely lights out. I expect that to continue this week on the road at Georgia Tech. And I know on a lot of the shows I mentioned that I did at the beginning of the year, I mentioned how I thought that Jahmyr Gibbs was overvalued where he was going in fantasy drafts. And so far, that is playing out as predicted. And unfortunately for a lot of you Jahmyr Gibbs owners, you've now got to start making decisions on what to do with him. 99 yards in the opener against Northern Illinois, but 56 against Kennesaw State, 30 against Clemson. Couple of catches. I think you're fine. I think this matchup against North Carolina is what Gibbs is going to need to kind of get back on track. And I think for you guys that have held on to Jahmyr Gibbs, this might be the game that kind of tells you what you're going to get. But I said earlier in the year, my concern with Gibbs wasn't going to be the touches. He was going to get them as a ball carrier and receiver. It was just whether or not Georgia Tech's offense was going to score enough points for him to find the end zone enough, which ultimately puts you in the top tier of fantasy backs. And that's been my concern with Jahmyr Gibbs, is whether or not he's going to find the end zone. Let's see what happens this weekend against a North Carolina team. Now, North Carolina, Josh Downs lights out, Sam Howell lights out, Ty Chandler, another player that a lot of you guys really, did well with holding on. And I think what we need to look at here is, I know there was a prediction for me about Caffrey Brown. He was one of my sleepers for North Carolina. You've had Simmons, you've had Green emerge there, but there really doesn't seem to be right now, as I look at North Carolina and their statistics, there really doesn't seem to be a true number 2 receiver that you say it's that guy. Caffrey Brown, 1 catch, 75 yards and a touchdown last week. I think he dropped a potential touchdown the week before. I still have hopes for that prediction that maybe by midseason, hopefully, I'm hopeful that he can get in that lineup, because I do have him in some best ball lineups as well, this best ball drafts this year, where we don't make any moves. So you stick with the player all throughout the year. West Virginia playing on the road at Oklahoma. West Virginia, let's see if Letty Brown can do it. I thought he'd struggle a little bit against Virginia Tech. Did well. First play from scrimmage, he broke for a long touchdown. Oklahoma just spreads the ball around a lot. I mentioned in my notes and observations that I thought from a fantasy perspective, I'd rather Kennedy Brooks than Eric Gray. I thought he would be a better fantasy back long term. Now, 1 yard here or there makes all the difference in the world. Gray has been given some goal line opportunities. He's just not been able to get into the end zone. Kennedy Brooks has. Now, will that dictate how the rest of the season plays out? Still remains to be seen. From a receiver standpoint, the guy that's really disappointing right now would be Jordan Mims. I just think Oklahoma spreads it around enough. He seems a little bit more of a boom or bust play, in my opinion. And because Oklahoma does spread the ball around enough, I do have my concerns about Jordan Mims as far as being a fantasy receiver. 2 catches, 32 yards last week against Nebraska, 1 catch for 19 yards against West Carolina, after 5 catches for 117 yards in the opener against Tulane. Remember, he went out of bounds at the half-yard line in that, so he could easily have a touchdown. But 3 games so far, no touchdowns from Marvin Mims after he scored 8 in 10 games last year. Not a good start for him so far this year. Akron playing at Ohio State. Henderson, here's the question. What do you do with your Ohio State assets in this matchup? I think you've got to roll with them. I think you've got to go with Stroud. Olave didn't even have a catch last week for that offense. I think that they will make it a point to get him the ball early in this game, to get him touches. I do think this Olave is a player that you're going to want to start this week, because I think they're going to get him involved in the offense. Obviously, if you still have Henderson, you're going to get him in. There was concern about Mayan Williams last week. I don't know how. I don't know, the certainty of the news that kind of came through, but there was supposedly some news that Mayan Williams had missed a day of practice for not feeling well. Teague had a good week of practice, and that's why you didn't see Mayan Williams play, and you saw Henderson Teague as sort of the 1-2 punch in the backfield. Curious to see how things play out this week. If they sort of, say, hey, we've kind of rode Henderson here for a couple of weeks. Let's give the other guys some carries. Let's see how that plays out. I don't expect another 200-yard game for Henderson, but I do think this matchup against Akron, you've got to start all you Ohio State players, whether or not you've got Wilson, Olave, Stroud, Henderson. I think you've got to get them all in there this week in this matchup. Southern Miss playing on the road at Alabama. You're going to go with the usual suspects at Alabama. I think Robinson there at running back. Obviously, Jameson Williams, John Mechie, Bryce Young, get them in. Ohio playing on the road at New Mexico State. And this could be a really sweet matchup, I think. A little bit of an under-radar play for Nick Mardner, wide receiver of Hawaii. I think New Mexico State's going to be able to put up a couple of points on Hawaii. Hawaii hasn't impressed me at all this year. I think we could see a lot of points in this game, and that's good news if you're owners of obviously, if you've owners of Calvin Turner. And I do think that Nick Mardner is a nice play this weekend at the receiver spot. Usually Calvin Turner, maybe Chevin Cordero have been the only two surefire plays for Hawaii. But when you look at Mardner now, he's gone for at least 97 yards in 3 consecutive weeks. He's scored a touchdown in 2 of the last 3. And I think this matchup this week against New Mexico State really puts him in a position for a really big game. I can't say breakout because he's been really good so far. Florida Atlantic playing on the road at Air Force. When we talk about under the radar receivers a little bit, I think we can't go far down that list without mentioning LeJontay Wester over at Florida Atlantic. At least 7 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown in each of the last 2 games against Georgia Southern and Fordham. This matchup against Air Force will be a little tighter. They will need him, though, so I expect him to come out with a lot of catches in this game. Troy playing on the road at Louisiana Monroe. That Louisiana Monroe Rich Rod offense still has not been able to get on track. The only bright spot so far in that offense in 2 games has been Boogie Knight, who's caught at least 6 passes for 50 yards in both matchups. But if they can't find the end zone, what good is he anyway? And I would only even consider him in deep PPR leagues, but there's nothing that makes me optimistic or hopeful about that ULM offense, even at home this weekend against Troy. UAB playing on the road, traveling to New Orleans, playing Tulane. I do think this could be a game where maybe Michael Pratt has a little bit, I wouldn't say a bad game, but I think this game potentially could be the one where he has the least fantasy points throughout the year. I think it really depends on how UAB can run the ball against Tulane, but Pratt is thrown for at least 2 touchdowns in every game this year. He's rushed for a touchdown in 2 of the last 3. And I do think, and if you're an owner of the UAB offense, you want to see Tulane score some points because you want to see Trey Shropshire, the wide receiver. You want to see Dwayne McBride. Obviously, you want to see UAB have to score some points. But in order to do that, here's an important point about UAB. I think, and here's a situation as well, I think we've seen the end of Tyler Johnston. I mean, Tyler Johnston to me just isn't that good. He's thrown 3 interceptions this year, only 2 touchdowns. The offense just seems to work better when Hopkins is in there at quarterback. And Hopkins last week, Dylan Hopkins, 6 of 7, 3 touchdowns. I think you've got to go ahead and start that guy. I'd be surprised if anything different happens this weekend. And curious to see how this Tulane UAB game plays out. Pratt was one of my sleepers at the beginning of the year. I really like him, but I do have a little bit of hesitation with this matchup, and I think you need to weigh your options on your bench if you've got Pratt this week. I don't think it's as slam dunk as it has been, and even when Tulane was playing Ole Miss, I thought Pratt was a good play. Tulane is at home, and I do think that is an advantage for him. But even though I think you got to start Pratt, there is something, I have some sneaky feeling that this might not be the greatest matchup for Tulane this weekend. Indiana playing on the road at Western Kentucky. I do think Western Kentucky is still going to be able to score points in this matchup on the road at Indiana. It won't be as easy for them as it was against Army, but I do think the good thing for Western Kentucky is they're catching Indiana between 2 big matchups, between Cincinnati and a Big Ten matchup. So it's all about timing with this Western Kentucky matchup. And I do think that plays into the Hilltoppers' hands a little bit. I don't expect them to win. I don't even know if the game's going to be close, But I do think that there's a good chance that Zappe and that Western Kentucky offense can put up 3+ touchdowns. And if they do, there's a good chance that Zappe is going to throw or account for all 3 of those through the air and on the ground. I do think it's going to be a good week. I think if you have Ty Freifogel, I do expect him to have a big week this week for the Hoosiers. New Mexico playing on the road at UTEP. And one thing, I don't know if we're going to get Deion Hankins back, but there's one play that I do like for UTEP. And I mentioned this with Zachary Franklin at UTSA, but Jacob Cowing is an under-the-radar play at receiver as well. He's gone over 100 yards in 2 of the 3 games. The only one he's caught a 3 touchdown in all 3 games. The only game he didn't catch 100 yards in was the game against Bethune-Cookman. They didn't need him, but a game against New Mexico State, game against Boise State, he's caught at least 5 passes, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And I think he's an under-the-radar play this week at home against New Mexico. California playing on the road at Washington. The Washington performance against Arkansas State for me was a little predictable. 7.5-point spread this week. They're favored over Cal. That's the one that's got my head scratch. I almost now want to fade the Huskies and take Cal to keep that game close because there's not much about that Washington offense to like. And I'm not sold yet that the performance against Arkansas State was enough to make me buy into the Washington offense. I'm still a stay away on the Washington offense. And I do like Damian Moore for Cal. Touchdown in all 3 games this year, at least 70 yards in all 3 games. And, he's done that on the road at TCU. He's done that against Nevada. Washington's defense is probably better than every team that they've played this year, but Cal has traditionally played Washington tough over the last couple of years. And so I do think that you can go ahead and start Moore this week if you need him based on that matchup, maybe a good flex option. With that being said, I don't want to skip over this. I do want to mention this, but over on the Washington side of the ball, right, you've got Jalen McMillan, 10 catches for 175 yards and a touchdown. We've got to keep tabs on him, but these are the type of plays where you've got to be careful because is he going to have This is the type of player that catches 10 passes, 175 yards, and a touchdown in a really sweet matchup. And then you come back the following week thinking that you've got a really good player. And this could be the type of player in my history of following this. Could be the guy that maybe lays the egg in the second week. We're just not sure. You've got a guy that caught 10 passes, hasn't caught a pass all year. Got to be careful going back to back with that. He's a player that I want to see do it again before I put him in the lineup for, in my fantasy lineup at receiver. South Florida going on the road playing at BYU. I like the Cougars in this matchup. I think you've got to go with the usual suspects, whether or not that starts Hall at quarterback. That's going to be a decision you have to make. Tyler Algier, I think, is a solid play. Gunnar Romney as well. Colorado in that struggling offense going on the road playing at Arizona State. Will DeMonte Trianum play and suit up this week? If not, that probably means more Rashad White, more Daniel Nagata. And so I think our eyes on whether or not are going to be on whether or not that Trianum comes back and plays. But the road matchup on against Arizona State doesn't really bode well for fantasy owners of Jarek Broussard. Remember, Colorado took that beat down at home against Minnesota 30-0. Broussard last week, 5 carries, 8 yards. I think he's going to be more of a matchup play this week, and I don't like this matchup at Arizona State for him this week either. So he's a player that most of you fantasy owners are going to be monitoring as well, because if he doesn't get things going soon, there's going to be a lot of players, fantasy owners, looking to jump ship on him as well. Arizona playing on the road at Oregon. Obviously, if this is a matchup where you've got CJ Verdell, you want to get him in there. I think this could be a matchup for Dye as well. I think Arizona struggling at 0-3. A good matchup here for that Oregon run game to get things going. And then finally, Oregon State on the road against USC. Jackson Dart coming in, playing lights out last week, leading that comeback victory against Washington State. He didn't practice much this week, if at all. I think the way this is going to play out is I think you're going to see Keaton Slovis get the start for USC. Hopefully, Keaton Slovis looked at that performance by Jackson Dart and says, I've got to get my ass moving. And if you do not see any improvement from Slovis this weekend, when Dart is still recovering a little bit from injury, then I think we see a change. I think this will be the week that determines whether or not Keaton Slovis stays as quarterback of USC a little bit longer, or if there is a change. This would have been the perfect game to get Dart in because he just came off of that win against Washington State. He'd had another good matchup at home against Oregon State. I think ideally, had Dart not got injured, you would have been looking at Dart starting this game. I think you're going to see Slovis start this game. The question is whether or not he starts hitting and pressing and trying to make too many plays. And if he does and finds himself in trouble, I think you're going to see Jackson Dart take over this offense as early as next week, if not this game, if he comes back and is ready for game day and Keaton Slovis starts slow. Be careful if you start Slovis, but I think he starts. And I think you've got to roll with him in this matchup against Oregon State because it's too good on paper not to have a USC starting quarterback. And so, long show. That ran down the week 4 slate, but that covered them all quite a bit. We're going to go ahead and keep this short in the wrap up. Remember, I'm going to try to get everything up on the website as soon as possible. Try to get those projections, rankings up tonight. If not tonight, early tomorrow morning. I should have all the brackets for the 4-1 Super Fantasy League updated probably by tomorrow. A lot going on. Mike's write-ups will be coming fast and furious for the rest of the weekend. The only thing we may not have is a Saturday night slate write-up, but we're going to have the rest of them coming for you. So the weekly top 10 player rankings, projections, DFS college football write-ups, all coming to you before the weekend. That's going to do it for week 4, guys. When I talk to you next time, we're going to be week 5. We're probably going to be at the halfway point of the regular season for many fantasy leagues. Until then, good luck this weekend, guys. We'll talk to you next week.